When I was 20 years old, my friend Marcus got into some serious trouble and ended up in jail. He desperately needed someone to stay at his place to take care of his elderly dog and keep his bird fed. I immediately volunteered because I was desperate to escape living with my mom and her much younger boyfriend. I should mention that Marcus was involved in some pretty shady activities, which is how he ended up behind bars. His place wasn't in the best neighborhood, and some pretty dangerous characters would hang around sometimes. Thankfully, they usually weren't active after I went to bed, so I rarely encountered them. But things got worse when Marcus couldn't pay his electric bill from jail, leaving me without any lights. The bedroom I was staying in had a deadbolt and an additional lock, which made me feel somewhat secure. Looking back now, I realize how incredibly naive and stupid I was. I was only 5 feet 3 inches and weighed just 100 pounds, but my desperation for independence made me feel brave. Every morning, I would wake up to find fresh footprints outside the living room window. One day, I even discovered that someone had cut the phone line outside. While all this was happening, Marcus's creepy landlord, Harold, started showing up randomly. Harold was a disgusting man with missing teeth who lived only about 3 football fields away. Since Marcus couldn't pay rent from jail and didn't want me to reveal his situation, I had to keep making excuses about him being away visiting family members. But Harold wasn't buying these excuses. He started showing up even more frequently, demanding rent money. Then he began making disgusting comments like, "My wife and I would be pretty excited to have you over, especially in a bikini." Soon, Harold became angrier and more frustrated with each visit. He would show up at any time, and since I didn't drive, I was usually stuck there for these uncomfortable encounters. Eventually, he stopped bothering to knock and just walked right in. When I told him this was illegal, he didn't seem to care at all. Earlier, I mentioned sleeping in a locked room. Unfortunately, one morning after I'd gotten up for some water, the daylight made me feel safe enough that I didn't bother locking the bedroom door again. I just closed it. Not long after falling back asleep, a strange, soft clicking sound woke me up. I gradually opened my eyes but didn't see anything, so I tried to go back to sleep. Then I suddenly snapped awake, feeling another presence in the room with me. As I slowly focused my eyes, I saw Harold standing over me, mouth breathing with the most disgusting, creepy grin on his face. I instantly bolted upright, grabbing the bed sheet and pulling it over my body. I went from 0 to 60 in less than a second, jumping out of bed and screaming at him at the top of my lungs. Harold backed up and practically ran out the front door. I locked it behind him and screamed, "I'm calling the cops." The police came, but since I had no proof and he hadn't actually hurt me, they couldn't do much. To this day, I'll never forget the sound of Harold's heavy mouth breathing as he leaned over my sleeping, defenseless body. Around 40 years ago, when my dad was still in college, he moved from Vietnam to Connecticut to pursue his education. As a first-generation immigrant who wanted to live close to campus while overlooking the city skyline, he went the cheap route and rented a rundown apartment for only $250 a month. My dad had taken English classes in Vietnam but wasn't fluent and knew nothing about American housing. His landlord, Oliver, gave off serious red flags that Dad brushed off because of the incredibly low rent. Oliver's apartment was directly next to my dad's. During his first night there, while unpacking, Dad heard high-pitched screeching and bizarre opera music coming from Oliver's place. He was exhausted, so he ignored it. The next morning when he woke up, he noticed a chair by his bed that hadn't been there before. When he went to use the bathroom, the toilet seat was up, though he remembered putting it down. Worse yet, his door was unlocked. Again, he brushed it off, not wanting to cause problems with his landlord or suggest the building was insecure. Since college didn't start until late August and he'd arrived 3 weeks early, he wanted to explore the city. When he left, he specifically remembered locking his door. But when he returned a few hours later, not only was the door unlocked, it was slightly open. This continued for weeks. Things would be moved from where he'd left them, food would disappear from his fridge, and other weird incidents kept occurring. Finally, my dad had enough. One night, he decided to stay awake and catch whoever was doing this red-handed. He finished his homework, got into bed, but remained awake. Sure enough, around 2 a.m. He saw his door handle turning and a hand sliding through. Then he watched Oliver creep in and take some eggs from the fridge. Not only that, but Oliver went into the bathroom for several minutes before slipping out again, leaving the door unlocked. This creeped my dad out, but for financial reasons, he decided to tolerate it for a few more nights until he finally confronted Oliver. Remember, this was before mobile phones and affordable cameras, so Dad had no way to gather evidence besides his word against Oliver's. The next night, he again heard the odd screeching and weird opera music from Oliver's room and decided to take matters into his own hands. That weekend, when Oliver went shopping, Dad broke into his room. What he found was absolutely horrifying. He discovered an old Kodak camera with extremely low-quality pictures of himself sleeping in bed. He immediately grabbed the photos and rushed to the police station. Dad moved out shortly after and later heard that Oliver had terrorized other residents with his strange screeching, opera music, and by moving their belongings around. We never learned exactly what happened to Oliver, only that he faced prison time. I seriously hope he was never allowed to be a landlord again. I was around 12 when this terrifying incident happened. It was a Saturday morning, and my parents were out of town for the weekend. They had left my older brother Connor to babysit me, but as soon as our parents left, he took off too. I was sitting in the living room watching TV when the doorbell rang. Instead of looking through the peephole like any smart person would do, I flung open the door, eager for company. I thought it would be my neighbor friends coming to play. Instead, I found two middle-aged men looking down at me with cold, calculating eyes. They asked if my parents were home, and without even thinking, I blurted out, "No, they're actually out of town for the weekend." I don't know why those words just slipped out, but if I could go back and scold my younger self, I absolutely would. The men exchanged a meaningful glance, and the older-looking one said with a fake smile, "Well, I'm your landlord, and we need to come inside and check a few things out." That's when pure terror hit me like a lightning bolt. I knew our real landlord, Mr. Peterson. He was a family friend who had known us for years, and he definitely wasn't either of these strangers standing on our doorstep. Thank goodness for quick thinking, because I managed to say, "Yes, but I need to grab something first." Before they could respond, I slammed the door shut and threw the deadbolt. My heart was pounding as I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the phone, dialing my mom's number with shaking fingers. The second I heard her voice, I broke down sobbing. I quickly explained about the two men at the front door claiming to be our landlord, but I knew they weren't. I told her I was terrified and begged her to come home immediately. Then I heard loud pounding on our living room window. My mom heard it too because she told me that Dad was already calling the police and I needed to let these men know that. Through my tears, I yelled as loud as I could toward the window where the two men were standing. "The cops are on their way." They responded through the glass, saying, "Hey, we're not going to hurt you. No need to cry. It's okay. We'll leave." After that, there was just silence. I couldn't see them anymore and assumed they had finally left. It felt like a lifetime, but the police arrived about 10 minutes later. My parents eventually pulled into the driveway, and my mom hugged me tighter than she ever had before. Both of us were crying. I got a serious lecture about never opening the door for strangers and how lucky I was to be alive. Connor got yelled at and grounded for abandoning me. The cops took a detailed report and searched the area for the two men, but never found them. I learned my lesson that day in the most terrifying way possible. I have no idea who those two men were or what their real intentions were, and I never want to find out.